Morning and most welcome to 411. We will continue with the World of Perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. We are presently at page 65 in the booklet. Second paragraph. The same sort of analysis extended to take in all the elements is to be found in the series of works by Gaston Bachelard on air, water, fire and earth. He shows how each element is home to a certain kind of individual of a particular kind. How it constitutes the dominant theme in their dreams and forms the privileged medium of the imagination which lends direction to their life. He shows how it is the sacrament of nature which gives them strength and happiness. These studies have all grown out of the surrealist experiment, which as early as 30 years ago sought in the objects around us and above all in the found objects to which on occasions we become uniquely attached. What André Breton called the catalysts of desire. The place where human desire manifests itself or crystallizes. So it is fairly widely recognized that the relationship between human beings and things is no longer one of distance and mastery. Such as that which obtained between the sovereign mind and the piece of wax in Descartes' famous description. Rather, the relationship is less clear-cut. Vertiginous proximity prevents us both from apprehending ourselves as pure intellect, separate from things, and from defining things as pure objects lacking in all human attributes. We shall have occasion to return to this point when, in conclusion, we try to establish how our view of the place of human beings in the world has changed over the course of these lectures. Lecture 4: Exploring the World of Perception, Animal Life. In the first 3 lectures, we argued with respect to science, painting and philosophy that the transition from classical to modern was marked by what might be thought of as an reawakening of the world of perception. We are once more learning to see the world around us. The same world which we had turned away from in the conviction that our senses had nothing worthwhile to tell us. Sure as we were that only strictly objective knowledge was worth holding on to. We are rediscovering our interest in the space in which we are situated. though we see it only from a limited perspective, our perspective. This space is nevertheless where we reside and we relate to it through our bodies. We are rediscovering in every object a certain style of being. That makes it a mirror of human modes of behavior. So the way we relate to the things of the world is no longer as a pure intellect trying to master an object, or space that stands before it. Rather, this relationship is an ambiguous one. Between beings who are both embodied and limited, and an enigmatic world of which we catch a glimpse. Indeed, which we haunt incessantly. But only ever from points of view that hide as much as they reveal. A world in which every object displays the human face it acquires in a human gaze. Yet we are not alone in this transfigured world. Indeed, in fact, this world is not just open to other human beings, but also to animals, children, primitive peoples, and madmen who dwell in it after their own fashion. they too coexist in this world. Today we shall see that the rediscovery of the world of perception allows us to find greater meaning and interest in these extreme or aberrant forms of life and consciousness. So much that the whole spectacle that is the world and human life itself takes on new meaning as a result. It is well known that classical thoughts has little time for animals, children, primitive people, and madmen. You will recall that Descartes saw animals as no more than collections of wheels, levers, and springs. In effect, as machines. Those classical thinkers who did not view animals as machines, instead saw them as prototypes of human beings Many entomologists were all too keen to project onto animals the principal characteristic of human existence. For many years, our knowledge of children and the sick was held back kept at a rudimentary stage. By the same assumption. The questions which the doctor or researcher asked of them were the questions of an adult or a healthy person. Little attempt was made to understand the world they lived in. Instead, the emphasis fell on trying to figure out how far they fell from the standards of human beings, or what a healthy person was capable of accomplish. As for primitive people, they were either looked to for a model of more attractive form of civilization, or else, as in Voltaire's essays on morals, their customs and belief were seen as no more than a series of absurd, inexplicable absurdities. Which all goes to suggest that classical thought was caught in a dilemma. Either the being that stands before us was likened to a human being, in which case it can, by analogy, it can be given by analogy the usual human attributes of a healthy adult. Alternatively, it is no more than a blind mechanism living in chaos, in which case meaning cannot possibly be ascribed to its behavior. But why were so many classical authors indifferent to animals, children, madmen, and primitive people? Because they believed there is such a thing as a fully formed man whose vocation is to be Lord and Master of nature. As Descartes put it, such a man can accordingly in principle see through to the very being of things and establish a sovereign knowledge. He can decipher the meaning of every phenomenon. Not just those of nature in its physical aspect, but also those of human society and history. And explain them by reference to their causes. Ultimately, such a man can locate the particular bodily flow in a child, primitive, madman, or animal that accounts for the abnormalities which keep them from the truth. For classical thinkers, this is a question of divine law. Which keep them from the truth. For classical thinkers, this is a question of divine law. For either they see human reason as a reflection of the Creator's reason, or even if they have entirely turned their back on theology. They are not alone in continuing to assume that there is an underlying harmony between human reason and the essence of things. From this standpoint, the abnormalities mentioned above can at best be accorded the status of psychological curiosities and consigned condescendingly to a quiet corner of normal sociology and psychology. Yet it is precisely this conviction, or rather this dogmatic assumption, that science and philosophy of a more mature kind have called into question. In the case of children, primitive people, the sick and more so still animals, the world which they occupy, insofar as we can reconstruct it from the way they behave. Is certainly not a coherent system. By contrast, that of healthy, civilized, adult human being strives for such coherence. Yet the crucial point here is that he does not attain this coherence. It remains an idea or limit which he never actually manages to reach. It follows that a normal person must remain open to these abnormalities of which he is never entirely exempt himself. He must take the trouble to understand them. He is invited to look at himself without indulgence. To rediscover with himself the whole host of fantasies, dreams, patterns of magical behavior and obscure phenomena which remain all-powerful in shaping both his private and public life. And his relationships with other people. Yes. These leave his knowledge of the natural world riddled with gaps, which is how poetry creeps in. Adult thought, normal and civilized. Is better than childish, morbid, or barbaric thought, but only on one condition. It must not masquerade as divine law, but rather should measure itself more honestly against the darkness and difficulty of human life, and without losing sight of the irrational roots of this life. Finally, reason must acknowledge that its world is also unfinished and should not pretend to have overcome that which it has managed to simply to conceal. It should not view as beyond challenge the one form of civilization and knowledge which it is its highest duty to contest. It is in this spirit that modern art and philosophy have come to re-examine with renewed interest those forms of existence which are the most distant from our own. For they bring to light the movement by which all living things, ourselves included, endeavor to give shape to a world that has not been preordained to accommodate our attempts to think it and act upon it. Classical rationalism allowed no middle ground between matter and intellect, and ranked living beings without intelligence alongside machines. It consigned the very notion of life to the category of confused ideas. Psychologists working today, by contrast, have shown us that there is such a thing as a perception of life, and they have tried to describe the various forms this takes. Last year, in an engaging work on the perception of movement, Albert Michotte from Louvain demonstrated that if lines of light move in a certain ways on a screen, they evoke in us without fail the impression of living movement. If, for example, two parallel vertical lines are moving further apart and one continues on its course while the other changes direction and returns to its starting position, we cannot help but feel we are witnessing a crawling movement, even though the figure before our eyes looks nothing like a caterpillar. And could not have recalled the memory of one. In this instance, it is the very structure of the movement that may be interpreted as a living movement. At every movement, the observed movement of the lines appears to be part of the sequence of actions by which one particular being whose ghost we see on the screen affects travel through space in furtherance of its own ends. The person watching this crawling will think they see a virtual substance, a sort of fictitious protoplasm, flow from the center of the body to the mobile extremities, which it projects ahead of itself. Thus, in spite of what mechanistic biology might suggest, the world we live in is not made up only of things and space. Some of these parcels of matter, which we call living beings, proceed to trace in their environment, by the way they act or behave, their very own vision of things. We will only see this if we lend our attention to the spectacle of the animal world. If we are prepared to live alongside the world of animals instead of rashly denying it any kind of interiority. is also part of life. This reminds me of the Swiss robotics maker Dr. Pfeiffer. Who constructed machine that only had movement, so to speak. He showed that movement itself was enough to carry knowledge, understand new things, change behavior, and even plan. Movement has not been part of the traditional way of understanding things. As Maurice Merleau-Ponty showed. But movement carry the whole perception. And by only acknowledging the static, fixed version of movement as object and space, we diminish the potential scope of understanding. We make it less by only acknowledging the objective side, as Merleau-Ponty showed to be the case in earlier times. This should not be mistaken as to be seen as a criticism of using objects and space. What he means is that there is more. That does does not mean that there is cause to ignore the objective and the static side. Something that doesn't seem to be allowed in the old thinking. We should be careful and not to exclude the object in space. In that case, we would be using the old thinking. Instead, you can add it, you can expand the understanding, including movement. And thereby also the objects and space and distances and surfaces will find its proper place within the expanded scope of understanding. That is something that makes the understanding virtually more, and I would say literally more. This has a very interesting parallel to quantum physics, where we earlier discussed imaginary particles, that they play a role in the becoming, in the presencing of reality. You literally get more. And you will understand more of the processes that makes up existence and becoming. They can all play together in the movement that is both consisting of the objects and space and the imaginary part, which olden people perceive to be useless, the madmen, the children, the primitives. This can also be compared to the traditional cause and effect as depicted and presented by James Locke. You can have that, and to that you can also add the interiority of things. That which is movement. This broadening of conception, of cause and effect, can also see further, bringing the cause and effect to be seen as simultaneously coming to being. So it can still be order before and after, can be cause and effect, but we can also have the wider underlying movement from where it springs. It is, strictly speaking, not necessary to exclude anything. I will also would like to compare that to the central perspective mentioned in the penultimate lecture. The central perspective doesn't have to be a limitation if it's seen in an expanded way, where the observer chooses the central perspective and thereby movingly is involved in the process. So the openness is still there and the closeness at the same time. They do not mutually exclude one another, but they can still be extinct. They can still be distinct, different. This reminds me of Heraclitus. From one stems the many, and from the many stems the one. way of seeing that is more allowance, inclusion, rather than the excluding one-eyedness, and which literally makes us more present and calm in our stature. I say thank you very much. That was my comment so far, and have a very pleasant afternoon that we have now. Thank you very much. On this very clement February morning.